The fine arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped into my mailbox between a grocery store flyer and my electric bill, and I nearly threw it away without reading it. I wish I had. I stood there in my driveway in Beaverton, Oregon, staring at the official-looking document with the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association letterhead. According to this piece of paper, I owed them $2,000 for unauthorized construction work on my chimney. My chimney. The one I'd gotten a permit for 3 weeks ago. The one that had been approved by the city before a single brick was touched. My name is Aaron Ingram, and I'd lived in this neighborhood for 7 years without a single problem. I paid my HOA dues on time, kept my lawn trimmed to their exact specifications, and even attended the occasional community meeting when I could stomach the drama. But this fine made absolutely no sense. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the notice. A woman answered on the third ring. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Hi, Brenda. This is Aaron Ingram from 4782 Maple Ridge Drive. I just received a fine in the mail about my chimney repairs, and there's been some kind of mistake. One moment, please. I heard typing in the background. Yes, Mr. Ingram. The fine was issued by our Architectural Review Committee. You failed to submit plans for approval before beginning construction. But I have a city permit. I got it 3 weeks ago before any work started. City permits are separate from HOA approval, Mr. Ingram. According to our bylaws, all external modifications must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee at least 30 days before work begins. I pinched the bridge of my nose. The chimney was crumbling. It was a safety hazard. My inspector said it needed immediate attention. That may be, but the rules apply to everyone. The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay. Can I at least speak with someone on the committee? This doesn't make any sense. I'll pass your concerns along to Sharon Patterson. She chairs the committee. Have a nice day, Mr. Ingram. The line went dead before I could respond. I spent the rest of that Tuesday afternoon digging through my filing cabinet, pulling out every document related to the chimney repair. The inspection report from February showing the deteriorating mortar and cracked flue liner. The quote from Morrison's Masonry. The city permit application I'd submitted on March 1st. The approval I'd received on March 18th. The work had started on March 25th, just a week ago, and wouldn't be finished for another few days. Everything was in order. Everything was legal and proper and by the book. The city book, anyway. That evening, my girlfriend Deanna Peters came over with takeout from our favorite Thai place. She found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, stress eating pad Thai straight from the container. Rough day, she asked, setting down her bag and peering at the mess I'd created. The HOA fined me $2,000 for the chimney repairs. The ones you got a permit for, the very same. Deanna pulled out a chair and sat down, picking up the fine and reading it carefully. She was a paralegal at a downtown firm, and I watched her face shift from casual interest to focused concentration as she scanned the document. This is dated yesterday, she said, right. But work started last week. Correct. So they waited until you were already in the middle of repairs to complain. She set down the paper and looked at me. That's weird, Aaron. If they had a problem, they should have said something the day your contractors showed up. That's what I thought. But apparently I was supposed to submit plans to their Architectural Review Committee 30 days before starting work. Did you know about that requirement? I shrugged. Honestly, maybe it was in the bylaws I signed when I bought the house. But that was 7 years ago, and I haven't needed to do any major exterior work since then. I figured the city permit would cover everything. Diana started sorting through my papers, organizing them into neat piles. You need to fight this. $2,000 is ridiculous, especially since you did everything legally with the city. The HOA lady said I could talk to the committee chair, someone named Sharon Patterson. Do it tomorrow and bring all of this with you. She gestured at the documents. Show them you did your due diligence. Show them the timeline. Make them explain why they waited a week to complain. I appreciated her confidence, but I'd lived in this neighborhood long enough to know how HOAs worked. Logic and fairness weren't always part of the equation. The next morning, I called the HOA office again and asked to speak with Sharon Patterson. Brenda told me she wasn't available but could meet with me on Friday afternoon at 4. I took the appointment, even though it meant leaving work early. Friday arrived with Portland's typical spring drizzle. I left my job at the software company downtown at 3, giving myself plenty of time to navigate traffic and arrive at the community center where the HOA held its meetings. I brought a folder with copies of everything: the inspection report, the permit application, the approval, photos of the deteriorating chimney, and a timeline I'd typed up showing exactly when everything had happened. The community center was a low brick building near the neighborhood entrance, flanked by perfectly manicured flower beds and a sign reminding residents about the upcoming spring social. I'd been here maybe half a dozen times in 7 years, usually for the mandatory annual meetings. Inside, the receptionist directed me to a small conference room. Sharon Patterson was already there, seated at the head of the table like she was conducting a board meeting for a Fortune 500 company instead of a suburban HOA. She was probably in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair styled in that particular way that required weekly salon visits, and wearing a beige blazer that looked expensive. "Mr. Ingram," she said, not standing or offering to shake hands. "Please sit." I took a chair across from her and set my folder on the table. "I understand you're contesting the fine," she continued, glancing at a laptop screen in front of her. "I am. I don't think it's valid. I obtained all the necessary permits before work began. City permits, yes. But you didn't submit anything to the Architectural Review Committee." I opened my folder and slid the timeline across to her. "I got the city permit on March 18th. Work didn't start until March 25th. Your fine is dated March 31st. If there was a problem, why didn't anyone say something when the scaffolding went up? When the contractors started working? Why wait a week?" Sharon glanced at the timeline but didn't pick it up. "The committee meets every other Wednesday. We review violations and issue fines accordingly. We discovered your unpermitted work during our March 29th meeting. But it's not unpermitted. I have a permit. From the city, not from us." I felt my frustration building. "With all due respect, Mrs. Patterson, the chimney was a safety hazard. The inspector said the flue liner was cracked and the mortar was crumbling. If I'd waited another 30 days to submit plans to your committee, then waited for approval, then waited for the city permit, I could have been looking at a chimney collapse or a house fire. Safety concerns don't override our bylaws, Mr. Ingram. The rules exist for a reason. We need to maintain the architectural integrity of this neighborhood. If we let everyone do whatever they want without committee approval, property values would plummet. It's a chimney repair. I'm not building an addition or painting my house neon green. I'm fixing something that was broken." Sharon folded her hands on the table. "I understand your frustration, but the fine stands. You have 27 days remaining to pay. And if I don't, the fine will increase by $500 and we'll place a lien on your property." I sat back in my chair, genuinely stunned. "You're going to put a lien on my house because I fixed a dangerous chimney. We're going to place a lien on your house if you refuse to pay a legitimate fine for violating HOA bylaws. This is insane. This is policy. The same policy that everyone in Meadowbrook Estates agreed to when they purchased their homes. She closed her laptop with a decisive click. If you'd like to appeal, you can request a hearing with the full board. They meet the second Tuesday of each month, but I'll be honest with you, Mr. Ingram. They rarely overturn Architectural Review Committee decisions. I gathered my papers and stood up. I'll take that appeal. Brenda will send you the form. I left the community center feeling like I just argued with a brick wall. Sharon Patterson hadn't even looked at my documentation. She hadn't cared about the timeline or the safety concerns, or the fact that I'd done everything legally. She just wanted her $2,000 and her authority acknowledged. Deanna came over again that night, and I told her everything while we sat on my back deck, watching the rain. She didn't even look at your papers, Deanna asked, incredulous. Barely glanced at them. That's not how this is supposed to work. Even HOAs have to follow their own procedures. Did she explain the appeals process? She said I could request a hearing with the full board. Do it. And this time, I'm coming with you. Over the weekend, I filled out the appeals form that Brenda emailed me. The next board meeting wasn't until the second Tuesday in April, which meant I'd be waiting almost 2 weeks for any resolution. In the meantime, the chimney work continued. Morrison's masonry was doing an excellent job, and by the following Wednesday, the repairs were complete. My chimney looked better than it had in probably 20 years, with new mortar, a new flue liner, and all the safety issues resolved. The final city inspection happened on Thursday. The inspector walked around the chimney, checked the interior work, and signed off on everything without a single concern. Looks great, he told me as he filled out the paperwork. You probably added years to this chimney's life. Good call on getting it fixed when you did. I thanked him and thought about mentioning the HOA fine, but what was he going to do about it? The city and the HOA were separate entities with separate rules, apparently. That weekend, Deanna helped me prepare for the board meeting. She dealt with enough legal disputes in her job to know how to organize an argument. You need to make 3 main points, she said as we sat at my kitchen table with coffee and highlighters. 1. You obtained all legally required permits before work began. 2. The chimney was a legitimate safety hazard that required immediate attention. 3. The HOA didn't notify you of any violation until work was already underway. Sharon said they didn't know about it until their March 29th meeting, which is still 4 days after work started. They have people who drive around the neighborhood looking for violations, right? I've seen them. That woman with the clipboard who always seems to be out walking her tiny dog. I knew exactly who she meant. Deborah something. She's on the Architectural Review Committee. So she had to have seen the scaffolding, seen the contractors, seen the work happening. Why didn't she say something then? It was a good question. The more I thought about it, the stranger the whole situation seemed. In 7 years, I'd never had a single interaction with the Architectural Review Committee. But I'd seen them in action. They'd find my neighbor for painting her front door the wrong shade of red. They'd made someone 3 streets over remove a vegetable garden that was visible from the road. They were thorough, vigilant, and quick to respond to violations. So why had they waited a week to find me? The Tuesday board meeting finally arrived. I took the afternoon off work, and Diana met me at my house so we could drive over together. I wore slacks and a button-down shirt, trying to look as professional and reasonable as possible. The meeting was held in the same conference room where I'd met with Sharon. This time, though, all 5 board members were present, seated along one side of the table. Sharon sat in the middle, clearly the power center. To her left was a man in his 60s who introduced himself as Robert Chen, the board treasurer. To her right was a younger woman, maybe 40, named Melissa Harris, the secretary. At the end sat two other members, James Dumont and Deborah Wagner, the woman with the clipboard and the tiny dog. Deanna and I sat across from them, my folder of documents between us. Sharon called the meeting to order with bureaucratic formality. "We're here to consider an appeal from Aaron Ingram regarding a fine issued for unpermitted architectural modifications. Mr. Ingram, you have 15 minutes to present your case." 15 minutes. For a $2,000 fine. I took a breath and started talking. I walked them through the timeline, showing them the inspection report from February that documented the chimney's deteriorating condition. I showed them the permit application I'd submitted to the city on March 1st and the approval I'd received on March 18th. I explained that work had begun on March 25th and that I'd received their fine on March 31st, after the work was already substantially complete. "I understand there's a requirement to submit plans to the Architectural Review Committee," I said. But I wasn't aware of it, and even if I had been, the chimney was a safety hazard that needed immediate attention. The inspector told me the flue liner was cracked, which could have led to carbon monoxide leaking into my house or even a fire. I couldn't wait another month or more for committee approval. Sharon started to respond, but Deanna jumped in. "Excuse me," she said politely but firmly. "I'm Deanna Peters, and I'm here as a friend and advisor to Mr. Ingram. I'd like to point out a few procedural concerns." The board members exchanged glances. "This isn't a legal proceeding," Sharon said. "Mr. Ingram doesn't need representation. I'm not representing him legally. I'm just here to help ensure everything is handled fairly." Deanna smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. According to the Meadowbrook Estates bylaws, which I read very carefully this week, the Architectural Review Committee is required to notify homeowners of potential violations within 48 hours of discovery. "Is that correct?" Sharon's expression tightened slightly. "That's correct." "And when did the committee discover Mr. Ingram's chimney repairs?" "At our meeting on March 29th. But the scaffolding went up on March 25th. The contractors were working for 4 full days before that meeting. Are you telling me that no one on the committee noticed?" Deborah Wagner shifted in her seat. "I saw the scaffolding on my walk that Saturday, March 26th. The room went very quiet. Diana's voice remained calm. So the committee knew about the work on March 26th but didn't notify Mr. Ingram until March 31st. That's 5 days, not 48 hours. Sharon's face was turning pink. "We didn't issue a notice of violation. We issued a fine after reviewing the situation at our scheduled meeting." "But Mr. Ingram should have been notified of the potential violation immediately, so he could have stopped work and submitted plans if necessary. Instead, the committee waited, let the work continue, and then fined him $2,000 after it was too late to change anything. That seems designed to maximize the penalty rather than correct the behavior." "That's not what happened," Sharon said, her voice rising slightly. "Then what did happen?" Deanna asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the committee deliberately waited until Mr. Ingram couldn't feasibly stop the repairs before imposing a fine." Robert Chen, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "I'd like to see the inspection report, the one from February." I passed it across the table. He read it carefully, then showed it to the others. "This is pretty serious," he said after a moment. "If the chimney was in this condition, it really was a safety hazard." "Safety hazards don't override our procedures," Sharon insisted. "Maybe they should," Melissa Harris said quietly. "I mean, if someone's house is in danger, we can't expect them to wait 30 days for committee approval." "The bylaws don't make exceptions for safety hazards," Sharon said. Diana leaned forward. Actually, they do. Section 7. Subsection 3 states that emergency repairs necessary to prevent imminent damage or danger to persons or property may be undertaken without prior approval, provided that the homeowner notifies the committee within 72 hours of beginning work and submits documentation within 15 days. Sharon blinked. I'm not familiar with that section. It's on page 18 of the bylaws. I brought a copy if you'd like to see it. Deanna pulled out a printed document, tabbed and highlighted. She'd done her homework. James Dumont took the bylaws and read the section Deanna had cited. She's right, it's here. Did you notify the committee within 72 hours? Sharon asked me, grasping for some violation she could enforce. No, I admitted. I didn't know about that provision, but I didn't know about any of the HOA requirements for exterior work. I've lived here for 7 years without doing any major projects, so I've never needed to familiarize myself with those specific rules. Ignorance isn't an excuse, Sharon said. But it is relevant, Robert Chen interjected. If Mr. Ingram genuinely didn't know about the requirements, and the work was legitimately necessary for safety reasons, and we didn't notify him promptly when the violation was discovered, then maybe the fine is excessive. The fine is standard for unpermitted architectural modifications, Sharon said. For things like unauthorized additions or inappropriate paint colors, sure, Melissa said. But this was a repair, a necessary repair. It's not like he built a second story without asking. The board members started talking among themselves, their voices overlapping. Sharon was clearly frustrated that her authority was being questioned. Robert and Melissa seemed sympathetic to my situation. James and Deborah looked uncertain, glancing between Sharon and the others. Finally, Sharon held up a hand for silence. We need to vote. All in favor of upholding the $2,000 fine. Sharon and Deborah raised their hands. All in favor of overturning the fine. Robert, Melissa, and James raised their hands. Sharon's jaw tightened. The motion to overturn passes. The fine is rescinded. I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost slumped in my chair. Deanna squeezed my arm under the table. However, Sharon continued, her voice cold, Mr. Ingram is formally notified that all future exterior modifications must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval at least 30 days before work begins. Failure to comply will result in fines. This meeting is adjourned. We left the community center and I didn't speak until we were in my car with the doors closed. I can't believe that worked, I said. The bylaws were on your side, Deanna replied. Sharon just didn't expect anyone to actually raid them. Thank you. Seriously. I would have been lost in there without you. That's what I'm here for, she smiled. Also, did you see her face when James voted against her? I thought steam was going to come out of her ears. We went out for dinner to celebrate, and I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The fine was gone. The chimney was fixed. Everything was back to normal. That feeling lasted about 4 days. On Saturday morning, I was mowing my front lawn when Deborah Wagner walked by with her tiny dog, a white fluffy thing that looked like an ambulatory dust mop. She stopped at the edge of my property and stared at my mailbox. I turned off the mower. Morning, Deborah. She didn't respond. She just stood there examining my mailbox like it was a museum exhibit, then pulled out her phone and took several photos. Is something wrong? I asked, walking over. Your mailbox post is faded, she said. I looked at the post. It was slightly weathered, maybe a bit less vibrant than when I'd first painted it 5 years ago. Okay, mailboxes must be maintained in good condition. I'll be reporting this to the committee. She walked away before I could respond, her little dog trotting beside her. I stared at my mailbox post. It was fine. It was completely functional and looked perfectly normal. But apparently, it was now a violation. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more notices. One for a weed in my flower bed that turned out to be a black-eyed Susan I'd planted deliberately. One for parking my car on the street overnight when my garage door opener broke. One for having my garbage cans visible from the road for more than 12 hours after pickup, which happened because I had to work late and couldn't get home in time to bring them in. Each notice came with a warning that failure to correct the issue within 48 hours would result in a fine. It was clearly retaliation. Sharon and Deborah were going after me for winning the appeal. Diana was furious when I told her, "They can't do this. This is harassment." What am I supposed to do about it? Fight back. Document everything. Every notice, every interaction, every time they target you for something ridiculous while ignoring the same issues on other properties. She had a point. I started taking walks around the neighborhood with my phone, photographing other mailboxes that were just as faded as mine, other people's garbage cans that sat out for days, other flower beds with far more weeds than my one violation. The pattern was clear. I was being targeted. In mid-May, things escalated. I came home from work to find a new notice on my door. This one claimed that my fence was 6 inches too tall and needed to be modified within 30 days or I'd face a fine of $5,000. $5,000 for 6 inches of fence. I measured the fence myself. It was exactly 6 feet tall, which was the maximum height allowed according to the bylaws Deanna had shown me. I measured it 3 times to be sure. It was not too tall. I called the HOA office and asked to speak to someone about the notice. Brenda transferred me to Sharon Patterson. "Mrs. Patterson, I received a notice about my fence, but my measurements show it's exactly 6 feet tall, which is the maximum allowed height." "Our measurements show 6 feet 6 inches, Sharon said. "Who measured it?" "The Architectural Review Committee conducted an inspection of your property yesterday. Without notifying me first. We don't need permission to inspect properties from common areas. The fence is in my backyard. That's not a common area." There was a pause. "The measurement was taken using appropriate tools and documented appropriately." "I'd like to see the documentation. You can submit a request in writing." "I'm submitting it now, verbally." "Written requests only, Mr. Ingram. Have a nice day." She hung up. I stood in my kitchen, holding my phone, trying to decide if I was more angry or bewildered. They were making things up now, just fabricating violations to justify fines. Diana came over that evening and we sat in my backyard, measuring the fence from every possible angle. No matter how we did it, the result was the same, 6 feet exactly. "We need to get a professional surveyor out here," Diana said. "Someone whose measurements will hold up if this goes legal." "You think it's going to go legal?" "I think Sharon Patterson has decided to make your life miserable, and she's not going to stop until someone forces her to." I hired a surveyor on Monday. He came out on Wednesday, spent an hour carefully measuring my fence at multiple points, and provided me with a certified document stating that the fence was, at its tallest point, 72 inches, 6 feet exactly. I submitted copies of the survey to the HOA office, along with a formal complaint about the false violation notice. The response came a week later. The fence violation was dropped, but a new fine was issued for failure to maintain proper drainage in the front yard, causing water runoff that affects neighboring properties. I didn't have drainage problems. My front yard was graded properly and had never caused any runoff issues. I asked my neighbors on both sides if they'd experienced any water problems from my property. Both said no. This was getting absurd. Deanna suggested I attend the next HOA board meeting, not to appeal anything, but just to observe and let them know I was paying attention. The meeting was on the second Tuesday of June, and the agenda was posted in the community center lobby. Budget discussions, upcoming neighborhood events, and enforcement actions. About 20 homeowners attended, most of them there for the social aspect rather than any actual business. I sat in the back and watched as the board went through their routine agenda items. Sharon ran the meeting with iron control, barely allowing discussion before calling for votes. When they reached enforcement actions, my name came up. Aaron Ingram, 4782 Maple Ridge Drive, Sharon read from her notes. Currently under review for multiple violations including improper drainage, failure to maintain mailbox standards, and overnight street parking. I raised my hand. Excuse me, but I've corrected all of those issues and provided documentation. Sharon didn't even look at me. The committee will review your submissions and respond accordingly. When we've completed our review. It's been 3 weeks since I submitted the drainage survey. These things take time, Mr. Ingram. Robert Chen spoke up. Sharon, do we have the documentation he submitted? Maybe we can review it now. We don't have time in this meeting for individual case reviews, Sharon said curtly. We'll handle it in committee. After the meeting, Robert approached me in the parking lot. He was a soft-spoken man, probably in his late 60s, with gray hair and a kind face. I apologize for what's happening, he said quietly. Sharon has been difficult since the Chimney fine was overturned. She doesn't like being contradicted. So she's just making up violations to get back at me. I can't prove that, but he glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Let's just say you're not the first person she's targeted after a dispute. Usually people just pay the fines rather than deal with the hassle. I'm not paying fines for violations that don't exist. Good. Someone needs to stand up to her. He hesitated, then added, keep documenting everything. Every notice, every interaction, every photo. If this gets worse, you're going to need it. It did get worse. In July, I received a notice that my grass had exceeded the maximum allowed height of 3 inches and that I'd be fined $50 per day until it was corrected. I measured my grass. It was 2.5 inches. I'd mowed it 3 days earlier. I took photos, time-stamped and geo-tagged, showing the grass height with a ruler. I submitted them to the HOA. The fine stood. When I called to appeal, I was told that appeals could only be submitted in writing and would be reviewed at the next board meeting. The next board meeting was 3 weeks away, which meant I'd rack up over $1,000 in fines before I could even present my evidence. I paid to have my lawn professionally measured and certified. The landscaping company provided a detailed report showing that my grass was well within the acceptable range. I submitted that too. The fine increased to $100 per day for failure to comply with remediation orders. That's when I decided to fight back for real. Deanna helped me draft a formal complaint to the board, citing harassment, retaliation, and abuse of authority. We documented every violation notice I'd received since the Chimney fine was overturned, showed the pattern of escalating accusations, and provided evidence that each violation was either false or being selectively enforced against me, while similar issues on other properties were ignored. We also filed a complaint with the Oregon Department of Justice, which had a division that handled HOA disputes. I wasn't sure if anything would come of it, but I wanted a paper trail. The response from Sharon Patterson was swift and harsh. I received a letter stating that I was being fined an additional $5,000 for creating a hostile environment and making false accusations against HOA leadership. $5,000 for complaining about being harassed. That was when Deanna told me it was time to hire a real lawyer. We met with Thomas Fletcher, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Portland, in one of those old buildings with character and creaky floors. He listened to my whole story, reviewed all my documentation, and leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "They've overreached," he said finally. "Badly. You can't fine someone for filing a complaint. That's retaliation, and it's explicitly prohibited under Oregon law. So what do? We send them a cease and desist letter. We demand they rescind all fines issued since the Chimney fine was overturned, and we threaten legal action if they continue this pattern of harassment. Will that work? Maybe. If they're smart, they'll back down. If they're not." He shrugged. "We go to court." Thomas drafted the letter that afternoon. It was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to, "Stop harassing my client or we'll sue you into oblivion." We sent it certified mail to Sharon Patterson, the HOA board, and the HOA's management company. The response came a week later, and it wasn't what I expected. Sharon Patterson resigned from the board, effective immediately. So did Deborah Wagner. The remaining board members, Robert Chen, Melissa Harris, and James Dumont, voted to rescind all fines issued to me after the Chimney appeal. They also voted to conduct an internal audit of all enforcement actions taken during Sharon's tenure as committee chair. I felt vindicated, relieved, and exhausted all at once, but it wasn't over yet. A few days after Sharon's resignation, I got a call from Detective Maria Gonzalez with the Beaverton Police Department. She asked if I could come to the station to answer some questions about my HOA. I called Thomas immediately. He met me at the police station that afternoon. Detective Gonzalez was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led us to an interview room and explained why I was there. "We've been investigating allegations of embezzlement at Meadowbrook Estates HOA," she said. "Your name came up in the financial records, specifically related to several fines that were issued and paid over the past few months." "I didn't pay any of those fines," I said. "We know. But according to the records we've obtained, someone did. Multiple payments were made from your account, totaling over $8,000. I felt my blood run cold. "That's not possible. I never made any payments." Detective Gonzalez showed me a series of bank transfer records. They showed payments from my account to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA account, all dated between May and July. Payments I had never authorized. "This is fraud," Thomas said immediately. "My client did not make these payments." "We believe you," the detective said. "We're investigating Sharon Patterson for embezzlement and identity theft. We have evidence that she created false payment records for several homeowners who were disputing fines, then pocketed the money herself." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She stole from me." "She stole from at least 6 homeowners that we know of, probably more. The investigation is ongoing." Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Sharon's crimes became clear. She'd been embezzling HOA funds for over 2 years, using her position as Architectural Review Committee chair to issue fines, then either pocketing the payments or creating false payment records to make it look like disputed fines had been paid. She'd stolen over $60,000. Deborah Wagner was charged as an accomplice. Apparently, she'd been helping Sharon identify homeowners who were unlikely to fight back, targeting elderly residents and people who worked long hours and didn't have time to attend board meetings. Both women were arrested in early August. The HOA hired a forensic accountant to untangle the financial mess. It took months, but eventually, every fraudulent fine was identified and corrected. I received a formal apology from the new board president, Robert Chen, along with a refund for my HOA dues as compensation for what I'd been through. The neighborhood was in chaos for a while. People were angry, scared, and mistrustful. Several homeowners filed lawsuits against the HOA for emotional distress. The management company that had been handling our paperwork was fired for failing to notice the embezzlement. Through it all, Diana was my rock. She helped me process everything, celebrated the small victories, and talked me through the frustrating setbacks. In November, Sharon Patterson pleaded guilty to embezzlement, identity theft, and fraud. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all the homeowners she'd stolen from. Deborah Wagner took a plea deal and received 2 years probation in exchange for testifying against Sharon. By December, things finally started to feel normal again. The new HOA board, led by Robert Chen, implemented oversight policies to prevent future embezzlement. They also revised the architectural review process to be more transparent and fair, including provisions for genuine emergency repairs that didn't require advance approval. My chimney, the thing that had started this whole mess, stood solid and safe through the winter storms. Sometimes, I'd sit in my living room with a fire going, listening to the rain outside, and think about how close I'd come to just paying that initial $2,000 fine. How much easier it would have been to write the check and move on. But I hadn't, and because of that, a criminal had been stopped and dozens of homeowners had gotten justice. On Christmas Eve, Diana and I hosted a small gathering at my house. Robert Chen and his wife came, along with Melissa Harris and a few other neighbors who'd been caught up in Sharon's schemes. We toasted to fresh starts and new beginnings, to standing up for what's right even when it's hard. As everyone was leaving, Robert pulled me aside. "You know the board needs a new member," he said. "James Dumont is moving to Seattle next month. We could use someone who actually understands the bylaws and isn't afraid to speak up." "Any interest?" I laughed. "After everything I've been through, you want me to join the HOA board? Who better? You've seen the worst of what can happen when power goes unchecked. You'd help make sure it never happens again." I told him I'd think about it. That night, after everyone had gone home and it was just Diana and me cleaning up wrapping paper and dessert plates, she asked me what I was going to do. "About the board position?" "Yeah." I looked around my living room at the fireplace with its properly functioning, fully permitted, completely legal chimney. I thought about how much I loved this neighborhood despite everything that had happened, how it was worth fighting for. "I think I'm going to say yes," I told her. She smiled. "Good. Someone needs to keep them honest." In January, I was appointed to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. My first act was to propose a policy requiring all fines over $500 to be approved by a majority board vote, not just the Architectural Review Committee. It passed unanimously. My second act was to organize a community meeting where homeowners could ask questions and voice concerns about HOA policies. Over 100 people showed up. We didn't solve everything that night, but we started important conversations about transparency, fairness, and accountability. The chimney that had caused all this trouble continued to work perfectly. I got it inspected again in March, just to be safe, and the inspector gave it a clean bill of health. No cracks, no deterioration, no safety concerns. On a sunny Saturday in April, almost exactly a year after this whole saga began, I was working in my front yard when I noticed my mailbox post looking a bit faded. The paint was weathered and starting to peel in places. I went to my garage, grabbed a can of paint and a brush, and spent an hour giving it a fresh coat. Nobody fined me. Nobody harassed me. Nobody made my life difficult. It was just a guy fixing his mailbox in his neighborhood in peace. And that, I realized, was all I'd ever wanted. Deanna came over that evening with pizza, and we ate it on my back deck watching the sunset. The fence, exactly 6 feet tall, cast long shadows across the yard. "You know what I was thinking," she said. "What's that? We should probably make this official." She wasn't looking at me, just studying her pizza like it held the secrets of the universe. "Make what official? Us. This." She gestured vaguely at my house, at the two of us, at everything we'd been through together. "I've basically been living here half the time anyway. And I'm tired of keeping a toothbrush in my purse." I set down my pizza. "Deanna Peters, are you asking to move in with me? Maybe. Depends on if you're going to get into any more battles with the HOA. I can only handle so much excitement. I'm on the board now. I am the HOA." "Then I guess it's safe." She finally looked at me, smiling. "So, what do you think?" I kissed her, tasting tomato sauce and happiness and home. "I think you should get a real toothbrush holder." She moved in the following month. We painted the spare bedroom together, picked out new furniture, and argued about whether the living room needed a new rug. It was domestic and simple and exactly what I needed after a year of chaos. The HOA board meetings became routine. We discussed budgets and approved reasonable architectural modifications and planned neighborhood events. Occasionally, someone would complain about a neighbor's lawn or a loud party, and we'd handle it with common sense instead of vindictiveness. In June, I ran into Melissa Harris at the grocery store. She was the board secretary and had become a good friend over the past months. "You'll never guess who I heard from," she said as we stood in the produce section. "Who?" "Sharon Patterson's lawyer. She's trying to appeal her sentence, claiming she was under too much stress and wasn't thinking clearly when she committed the crimes." I snorted. "Is that going to work?" "Probably not. The evidence against her is overwhelming, but it's bold, I'll give her that. She always was bold. Just not in a good way." We chatted for a few more minutes before going our separate ways. Hearing Sharon's name didn't bother me anymore. She was a problem that had been solved, a chapter that had closed. That summer was quiet and peaceful. Deanna and I hosted barbecues, went hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, took a road trip to the Oregon coast. My work at the software company was going well. My house was in good repair. My HOA dues were up to date, and for the first time in over a year, I wasn't worried about finding a fine in my mailbox. In August, Robert Chen announced he was stepping down as board president due to health issues. The board voted to make me the new president, a role I accepted with some trepidation, but a lot of determination. My first presidential act was to create an ombudsman position, a neutral party that homeowners could contact with concerns or complaints without going through the formal board channels. We hired a retired mediator named Patricia Simmons for the role, and she quickly became one of the most valuable assets our HOA had. Disputes that might have escalated into fines and appeals were instead resolved through conversation and compromise. Patricia had a gift for helping people see each other's perspectives, and the neighborhood became noticeably more harmonious under her guidance. In October, the local news ran a story about Sharon Patterson's conviction, using it as a cautionary tale about HOA fraud. They interviewed me as the homeowner who'd first raised concerns about her behavior. I kept it brief and factual, not wanting to relitigate old wounds but wanting other people to know the warning signs of HOA abuse. After the story aired, I got calls and emails from people all over Oregon who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. I couldn't help them all, but I passed along Thomas Fletcher's contact information and shared what I'd learned about documentation, persistence, and knowing your rights. One woman from Eugene told me her HOA was fining her for having solar panels installed, even though Oregon law protected her right to use renewable energy. I connected her with an advocacy group, and last I heard, she was suing her HOA and expected to win. Another man from Salem was being fined for displaying a political sign in his yard during election season, which was clearly protected speech. He filed a complaint with the state and got the fine overturned within weeks. It felt good to turn my terrible experience into something useful for others. By the time the anniversary of that first chimney fine rolled around in March, my life had changed completely. I was HOA president, living with Deanna, and actively working to make sure no one else in Meadowbrook Estates would ever face the kind of harassment I'd endured. On the actual anniversary date, Deanna surprised me with a small celebration. She'd invited Robert Chen, Melissa Harris, Thomas Fletcher, and a few other people who'd supported me through the ordeal. To Aaron, Robert said, raising his glass of wine, who fought back when it would have been easier to give up and made our neighborhood better because of it. We toasted and ate cake and told stories about the various absurdities of the past year. It was cathartic and joyful and reminded me why community mattered, even when it was complicated. Later that night, Deanna and I stood on my deck looking at the stars. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Fighting Sharon instead of just paying the fine?" I thought about it honestly. Sometimes I regret how much stress it caused. How many hours I spent documenting violations and attending meetings and worrying about what would come next. But I don't regret standing up for what was right. If I hadn't, Sharon would still be stealing from people. Deborah would still be helping her. And I'd have paid $2,000 for following the rules. No regrets then. No regrets. We stood there in comfortable silence, and I realized something I hadn't fully articulated before. My house finally felt like home. Not because of the new chimney or the fresh paint on the mailbox post or the well-maintained fence, but because I'd fought for it. I defended it against people who wanted to abuse their power, and I'd won. The chimney continued to work flawlessly through the next winter. Every time I lit a fire, I thought about how that crumbling mortar and cracked flue liner had inadvertently exposed a criminal enterprise. How a simple necessary repair had led to justice for dozens of people. In March of the following year, Deanna and I got engaged. I proposed on a hike up to Multnomah Falls, with the spring snowmelt rushing down the rocks and the whole gorge coming alive with green. She said yes, before I'd even finished asking the question. We planned a small wedding for the fall, just close friends and family. Robert Chen offered to host the reception at the community center, free of charge as his wedding gift to us. "Are you sure?" I asked. "That place probably doesn't have the best associations for you." He laughed. "Aaron, you turned that community center from a place where bad things happened into a place where good things happen. It would be an honor." The wedding in September was perfect. Simple, heartfelt, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us. During the reception, Thomas Fletcher pulled me aside. "I heard Sharon Patterson was released early for good behavior," he said. I felt a spike of anxiety. "When?" "Last week. She's required to stay in the Portland area for her probation, but she's out." "Great. I doubt she'll bother you." "She's not allowed within 500 feet of Meadowbrook Estates as a condition of her release, but I wanted you to know." I thanked him for the heads up and tried not to let it ruin the evening. Sharon Patterson was a part of my past, not my future. She'd lost her position, her reputation, and her freedom because of her crimes. She had no power over me anymore. Deanna and I honeymooned in Hawaii for 2 weeks, hiking volcanoes and snorkeling and forgetting all about HOAs and fines and neighborhood drama. It was blissful. When we returned home, there was a letter waiting in our mailbox. Not a fine or a notice, just a simple envelope with a handwritten address. Inside was a card from the HOA board and several neighbors, welcoming us back and congratulating us on our marriage. It was signed by over 30 people, including families I barely knew. Deanna hung it on our refrigerator, and every time I saw it, I felt grateful for this community I'd fought so hard to protect and improve. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued serving as HOA president. Diana thrived in her work at the law firm, and our house on Maple Ridge Drive remained a peaceful haven where chimneys worked properly, and mailboxes stayed painted and neighbors looked out for each other. Years later, when people ask me about the whole Sharon Patterson saga, I tell them it taught me 3 important lessons. Know your rights, document everything, and never underestimate the importance of standing up to bullies, even when they hide behind official-sounding titles and community bylaws. But mostly, I tell them it taught me that home isn't just a place you own. It's a place you're willing to fight for, a place worth defending, and a place where, eventually, justice can prevail if you're stubborn enough to demand it. My chimney still stands strong, sending smoke safely into the Oregon sky on cold winter nights. And every time I light a fire, I remember that sometimes the things that seem like disasters are actually opportunities in disguise. Opportunities to stand up, fight back, and make things better for everyone. That chimney repair ended up costing me a lot more than the original quote from Morrison's Masonry. It cost me time, stress, legal fees, and more aggravation than I care to remember. But it also gave me Deanna, a deeper sense of community, the knowledge that I could stand up for myself, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice, however delayed, eventually arrived. And honestly, that's worth more than any fine Sharon Patterson could have invented.